everybody. Today is the release of Plasticity 2025.1. It's a humongous release for us. Of course, there's a bunch of new solid and surface editing tools, but there's also a complete user interface redesign that we think makes Plasticity much more efficient to use, as well as a little bit easier to learn, and I hope you'll agree, a little bit more beautiful. We worked with a really talented design consultancy called Open Purpose to come up with new ideas for the user interface that builds on the foundation of what was good about the old system and fixes what was bad about the old system. So the first thing I want you to notice, of course, the color scheme's different and the fonts and icons, it all looks a little bit different. But the basic framework of Plasticity being a 3-column layout with a drawer for the outliner as well as a on the left and a properties panel on the right. It's all more or less the same. The selection modes are in the upper left, and camera and viewport properties are in the upper right. You will notice that the tools to create curves and solids has moved from the left to the right, but you can move it back if you like. One thing you will notice is that while the user interface is very opinionated and optimized for a certain kind of workflow, it's still quite a bit more customizable than the old one. So I want to focus, for example, now on this set of properties panels. You can collapse the ones that you don't use and just focus on the ones that you do. So for example, I leave shader mode open, planes and selection open a lot. In general, we hope that the information that's presented here is much more legible than before. Selection, for example, I think is much easier to visually scan. Things are fewer clicks. Changing the shader is 1 click instead of 2. If you find yourself often changing the FOV of the camera, it's now 1 click away instead of 2 clicks away. The same is true of changing units, changing the grids. A lot of things that were 2, even 3 clicks are now just 1 click. And you can, the properties that you change frequently, you leave the panels open, and the ones that you change infrequently, you leave collapsed. There's, along those lines, there's a ton of new options and preferences. So for example, let's focus on CVs. This point, for example. You can change the size of CVs, you can change the thickness of curve segments, you can customize the padding of the app. There's more colors that you can customize, like the grid. There's just a lot more about the app that can be customized. Maybe I want to reset this to the default relative to before, so the app can better meet your needs. At the same time, we have, with this new modular system, we've been able to just offer more settings. For example, here is the isophotes shader, which is a great shader for identifying curvature and continuity on your models. We now have the option to change the density of the stripes, and for the draft shader, you can change the draft angle. There's more layer options, for example, for hiding edges, hiding curves, hiding faces. Again, all 1 click away, just so that you can model more quickly without thinking about things. We still have the F menu for searching for commands. The toolbars are over here. You can always customize key bindings. You can quickly get to documentation from the F menu. We have a kind of suggested command menu, which changes based on which objects are selected. For example, one edge being selected, it suggests these different commands. Instead of moving your mouse all the way down here to access these things, you can just type Shift F to get it right under your mouse cursor, just like the F menu is right under the mouse cursor. Yeah, so there's just a ton of ways in which we, by offering pie menus, the search menu, customizing key bindings, and the suggested command menu, you can be much more efficient, keep your mouse in the same place, and yeah, hopefully model much faster. Now, in addition, I want to mention that we think that Plasticity will be a little bit easier to use. There is inline documentation for some of the more advanced options in the commands. Plasticity, we really aim at intermediate to advanced modelers. It's not that we don't want beginners, of course, but we want to take beginners and make them experts at CAD, solid, and surface modeling. So we've focused on adding like clear images and text that illuminate what some of the more advanced options are in a way that I think will help everyone be a little bit better of a modeler and hopefully get things done a little bit more efficiently. So here, for example, is a very clear visual explanation of what a Y-blend is. And you'll find a few dozen of these visual tooltips all throughout the app in a way that we think just makes everyone a little bit better as a model. The last thing I will mention is there's a bunch of new creature comforts throughout the app. For example, with recent files, we show thumbnails. Not the most exciting feature, but we're excited to offer it finally. There will be notifications in the app when there's a new version to download. Many of the dialogues have just more buttons for locking and unlocking settings, for example, so that you can just do things a little bit more efficiently, conveniently. Yeah. Okay, so I think that's enough detail on the user interface for now. There are a ton of other things too, but this gives you all that you really need to know for the moment. I think to finish off this video, I'll show a couple of the more exciting surface modeling tools in this release, solid and surface modeling. One of the most important surfacing tools in professional surfacing packages like Alias is the ability to move CVs along their UVN coordinates. So we have a new command called slide, which allows you to move CVs either along their hull or along the local normal. And this allows you to work off axis as well as add things like crown very easy. We have a new section analysis tool which allows you to more easily visualize and enter into the interior of enclosed objects. Actually, this reminds me, let me show like a more specific example of this. So if, let's say, one of the things that I just want to show is like we can very quickly get into the interior of objects, but we also, this red color, we have a shader that indicates when solid bodies interfere with one another. So you can see that in this particular case, if you were to go ahead and 3D print this, there would be some interference of these objects and they wouldn't snap together quite so perfectly. Oh yeah, and one more thing. Let me show an important new change to the way transformations work in Plasticity. So you'll notice that the move, rotate, and scale commands have these new sections for orientation and pivot. If you're familiar with Blender, these icons and orientations should be hopefully familiar to you. But the specific thing I want to point out is that we now save pivots with objects. So by default, the position of the gizmo is at the bounding box center of an object. But once you set a custom pivot, for example, here on this face with Z pointing in this direction, I'm just gonna move it, for example. The next time I run the move command, the pivot is in the same place. So bodies now store a local pivot. You can always, at any given moment, switch back to, let's say, like the construction plane orientation, which in this case is the same as the world orientation. And if you have multiple bodies selected, you can change the position of the pivot, for example. But now that you can save the pivot with individual objects, you can manage much more complex scene hierarchies, for example, robot hands with fingers and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think that gives a good overview of all of the new tools that are in this release. It's an enormous release. It's probably the biggest point release that we've done in the last 2 years. Please give Plasticity 2025 a try. Download it today. I really think it's the best hybrid solid and surface modeler on the market, and I hope that you like it. Thanks.